First of all, I'd like to welcome Nigel Adams and Andy Ward, who've joined us from the Luton Model Railway Club, and in particular the Luton O-Gauge Group, and their friendly name is the Loggies. So I'm sure that you've heard of cloggies and loggies and all sorts of things. Luton O-Gauge Group have a lot of experience to share with us in that they've built a few layouts now which are based on a real location. So we'll be hearing about Central Works first, which is based on the Longbridge car factory. Andy's layout, Harpenden East, is actually based on the very real location of Harpenden over in Bedfordshire. And then, of course, we've got the West Coast Mainline diorama, which depicts the scene that happened and the location from the Great Train Robbery. And I'm sure Nigel and Andy will tell you about some of the ethical issues they had in terms of trying to depict that real location and making sure that they weren't actually glamorizing what happened, and that's not what it was intended to do at all. We'll also tell you where you can see all of these layouts, because Central Works is coming to Gildex in a week's time. We've got Harpenden East going to the Severn Valley Railway O-Gauge event a couple of weekends later, and the Great Train Robbery, which is West Coast Mainline diorama, is now based at Nene Valley Railway. So if anybody wants to see it, it has been donated to that railway. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Nigel and Andy. Welcome, both of you. It's very kind of you to come and share your expertise with everybody. And let me know when you want me to start the slide. I don't know whether you want to introduce each other and make sure people know who they're looking at.
Okay, thanks, Jackie. I'm Nigel Adams. This is Andy Ward. We do encourage everybody to please ask questions if you want to, just at the point while it's in your head. So it's key that you don't wait till the end, because we'll either have passed something over. If we're going to have already covered the item, we'll obviously be able to say that. But as we go through, we've prepared basically a panorama of pictures, and we're just going to talk through them for you, rather than, we're not going to have lots of text, because I think that's, apart from people just reading it, it's much better if we can actually talk around some photos. So that's really part of the plan for tonight. So initially you get to listen to me to talk about Central Works. Andy's going to cover the Harpenden East as it's his baby, and then we're going to do a joint thing on the West Coast Mainline diorama. So Jackie, if you're ready and you want to switch to slides, we'll make a start, and we'll see how we get on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this is our evening with, and we have our arms gently twisted to come up with this for you. So we hope you're going to enjoy the evening. And both of us, as I say, I'm prepared just presenting some facts about the experiences we had, what we've learned, what we did do that we was good at, what we did do that we were bad at. And obviously a lot of other people helped. The important thing to say is it wasn't just ourselves that did this, it was a team effort. And we'll introduce various people, some of which are listening in tonight, and we'll highlight those as well as we go along. But as I say, we do encourage you to ask questions, so feel free to dive in when you're ready, and I'm sure Ian will prompt us at the appropriate moment. We're assuming that things like volume and the view is okay. So you're going to see a slideshow. I promise you it won't be all bright red all evening, but there we are. So let's try going to the next slide, Jackie, please. Okay, and our title really for this evening is Considerations and Implications of Modelling Real Locations in Life. And the first thing, that doesn't really matter where you're modelling anything, there are a number of key factors in it. And if you go to the next slide, Jackie, straight away, we're just saying really that the three things for most of us, I think, unless you're particularly a wealthy person or you have unlimited space, the two things related to obviously how you can fit a layout or the model that you make into a given area. Can it be used all the time? Does it have to be stored? Is it something you can only put up at exhibitions? the time it takes to do it. I mean, we're all mortal here, so I'm assuming. So we therefore are in a position where perhaps those of us that can spend time on things, it's done as a joint effort with a club, or and of course that also means if you're doing it as a sole, a sole person doing the layout on your own, then cost is a major factor. So I would say for any of the projects, they all had these considerations to a degree. The first one, Central Works, really was obviously it's a club layout, so it's a joint managed thing and it's funded through the club. Obviously, members always provide stock and operators and so on, but the actual most of the work on it was obviously done as a joint thing. Harpenden is much different because, of course, Andy did all of that himself. So apart from having a little bit of help and he gets support, it shows, he's borne the cost and the storage space and everything else that goes with it. And a long time set aside over a number of years to work on it. And the last one, although I haven't really highlighted it, is just being sensitive about the subject or the layout or the topic that we've chosen. And in our case, that's particularly important with the West Coast Mainline diorama. The others, you could just say, are simply layouts like anybody else's work. And obviously we've just chosen places to suit the interest and the requirement we had. But we'll come back to those. So without any further ado, we'll go into the layout and start talking about why we did it and how we did it and what we found that's good. So next slide, please, Jackie. So here's our three subjects, as Jackie's already pointed out, and in the preamble, Central Works is based on the former Austin car plant at Longbridge. Now, of course, became Austin Rover, and of course now it's actually mostly been demolished, so nothing's there. So you have to rely entirely on historical information. Likewise with Harpenden East, and Andy will cover this in much more detail, but it was a branch line that went between Leighton Buzzard, through Luton and down to Harpenden and then to Wheathampstead and into Hatfield. So it was a good linking line between the West Coast, the Midland and the East Coast main line. Sadly, obviously, it was one of the ones that was swept away in all of the various changes in the 60s. But it would have been a terrific line to have kept. And again, the local area between what are effectively two natural scenic breaks, and I won't steal Andy's thunder because that's obviously more that he can talk about in detail. And then our last one, which is quite different for most groups, it's not an operating model in the true sense. The West Coast Main Line model, we chose to do something that was a snapshot in time, and it was an exercise partly in theatre, and we'll come back to that as well. So that's really our plan for the evening. If we now move to the next slide, we should drop into Central Works. So here we are. And our considerations for this were something that most of us have got quite a lot of stock, probably more than we would have had perhaps just if you had a layout for home. And a lot of it covered the Midland and Western regions. So it gave us an excuse to have a layout that could allow us to run quite a lot of our members' stock. So you're keeping some general interest for everybody rather than something that's very purist in one particular area. We also decided that it would be quite useful if we had a subject that was in this case industrial, because layouts we've modelled up to now have been predominantly, not exclusively, but predominantly have been country locations or scenic locations. So we thought this would be something a lot different. And we came up with the one at Longbridge because of the very condensed nature of the track work. Although we haven't copied the track work exactly, we feel we've got the flavour of it, and anyone seeing the layout, as you're going to see it in pictures tonight, will give you an indication of how we've tried to bring some interesting features into it and add some focus to the display. And as Jackie said, we're going to be showing the layout in a week's time at Stafford. So if you come along, do please come and say hello to us, and we'll be happy to talk in more detail about any particular features or parts that may be of your interest. So let's move on, Jackie, please. Next slide. Okay, so for each of the layout descriptions, we do away with the red highlighting banners. And what you're seeing here is an image of the Central Works location, although it's not really called Central Works. If anyone looks at a map of the Longbridge factories and the rail complex that was inside it, they were called North Works, South Works, and so on. So taking the name of Central Works gave us something that linked all that together, but it also gave us an opportunity to have something that was slightly a little more agnostic, and it gave us a reason to therefore choose not only the Austin car plant, but we could also choose a little bit of the Ford car plant at Dagenham. So that gave us a third opportunity then to run stuff from the eastern region as well. And if you see the layout operating at a show, you may end up seeing either one of the two sequences. We may either be operating an Austin sequence, or we may be operating a Ford sequence. Predominantly, we actually have focused on the Ford sequence, but we've got, because layouts are continually developing, we have plans to obviously enhance the Austin side of it. And as you can see from the picture, it's very much a mishmash of buildings, parts that have been added in a period where perhaps they weren't expected to be around for very long. So they've been makeshift sheds, corrugated buildings, and then of course factories of brick and normal typical industrial landscape. But just looking at the track work, the complexity of it gave us something of interest that we could do. And our biggest problem then, of course, is how much of it do you do justice to? How much do you consider in terms of space? Because obviously our layout is, Andy, is it 26?
25 feet.
25, yeah. So the layout is 25 feet long. It, of course, like any layout, can grow to be bigger, and we'll perhaps come back and touch on that a bit later. But this is typically perhaps a comfortable size that we can erect the layout and move it around without needing to hire articulated lorries. I mean, anyone who's gone and seen the marvelous work that's done by Simon George with the work that he's got with the roving layout, that's I can't remember exactly how long it is, but it's ridiculous. The one that he's been recently showed, I think it was in was it not Rotherham, Wakefield, I think it was.
Yeah.
So yeah, Heaton Lodge Junction. I mean, that's a massive undertaking, and clearly that's the sort of thing that doesn't lend itself to being able to erect in a quick time. And again, our subject, we're prolific exhibitors. We go to shows, lots of people see us at shows and have got to know us. Very often it's the same ugly faces behind the layout, but it's the different layouts. So what you're seeing is results of our work, but it's got to be something that we can transport easily, a cost-effective price, and obviously be able to erect with a group of people that aren't always going to be the same ones. So some of the factors that govern what we've done and what we've modelled have been covered by the fact that we obviously are basing things on cost and time, and that's quite key. Even though the layout itself has still got a long way to go, Central Works is by no means finished. There's a lot more detail to add, and it's constantly morphing and developing and improving itself. But the nice thing about having the Central Works layout based on either Longbridge or the Ford plant, we tried to make it so the layout can change its identity relatively quickly. And you'll see, if you're ever looking at the layout, depending on what features we've added or changed over, as we run to a timetable system, it gives us the ability to stop the timetable at a convenient changeover point. Everything is mostly back to where it was when we're ready to start again. So the cycle effectively completes itself. And it gives us the opportunity then to change the identity and perhaps run one sequence in the morning and a different sequence in the afternoon. And of course, as we get more adept in operating the layout of an exhibition, the time frame that takes for us to operate actually comes down from perhaps the first time we run it. It might be 2 hours or so as we go through the cycle, with each of us doing a particular task. When you get to the later part of the day, we're probably doing it in about an hour and a half, because purely we've got a bit more practiced at what we're doing, and you know where you can and move things to. But the nice thing again about Central Works, because of its historic location, it gave us an excuse to have bits of rolling stock, which we'll cover a bit later, that were quite unique or quite of interest. So it again, it's not just the layout itself and its back scene, it's actually the things that you can run on it that make it interesting. And that again helps either the parts because they're owned by the club, they actually are club stock, or they're items that belong to individuals, and we can vary what people see. And we've got one or two favorites that we like to bring out. And again, we're going to talk about those in a little while. So looking at the bottom of the slide, you can see that's the track plan of the layout. And while, of course, it doesn't mirror what you see directly above it, there are lots of similarities. And if we started just from the right-hand side of the layout, so if you're looking at the track plan, the large buildings at the back obviously are hiding our fiddle yards, so we use a cassette-based system in there. And at the front, we've got a couple of sidings which usually have a stock storage and just a little bit of freight interest. But the main operating part of the layout is just to the left of that overbridge that you can see. Just there's a cursor in there just at the moment, you can perhaps see it. And you can see there are two lines that approach from the back scene, or from the fiddle yard section. The one nearest the middle of the layout, coming in from the top about sort of 3 o'clock, going towards the left, that's the main line coming in. That's the arrivals and departures for, if you like, the BR side. The line above it, which is the one at the top of that, again, it's been highlighted with a cursor, if you can see, that's the industrial sidings, and that brings in our works shunters or our special freight, or items that are going, what would be purporting to go into the factory itself. And then we go into the network of sidings, and the sidings fan out at that point into either the industrial side, which are the two lines at the back, or the three in the front, which basically make up two loops. So we can run round. We've got a centre road where items can run round and stock can be shuffled and sorted. The line in the middle, which is the freight line, that's basically the freight arrivals, which then gets remarshalled, perhaps goes back off scene. So it's very much the activity that would have been seen at a very busy car plant, where items arriving, because it was encompassed on both sides by buildings and the main two parts of the works and the railway through the middle, there would have been a lot of cross transfer of stock. So we've captured that part of it. And then obviously at the bottom of the layout, the bottom of the screen, we've got a very small arrivals platform, which partly mimics a little bit about the works that was at Longbridge or Longbridge Station, but it's really cut in half, because the part where the viewing area is, or the public can see, which is right at the bottom of the page, that's the face, the viewing face. Effectively, it's representing the other half of the works that we simply couldn't show because we couldn't make the baseboards any wider, and it was reflected obviously in the ability for us to transport the layout. So the sidings at the very front, if you're looking just to the left of the overbridge and just to the right of the station platform, they are basically a stock lay-by siding where, for example, a workman's train may have been stabled, although obviously in Longbridge, the works trains perhaps would have come and gone, obviously just at normal shift times. And of course, Longbridge was a platform that was not used as public timetabled services most of the time. It was really only there for the works. So again, we have the opportunity to be able to move that backwards and forwards. Someone's just popped up a question asking us what's the width. Well, the width of the layout is 2'6". So it's just about, it is imperial, isn't it? It's not a metric size. It's not half a metre, is it?
No, but they were Alistair's boards, and he used to use me to
yeah,
say,
I think it's about 2'6". Yeah, 30 inches, there we are.
Give or take.
Yeah. So it's a manageable size, and obviously the layout crates to make it into manageable boxes when we come to move it. So really what you're seeing is, you might say, is one half of the layout, and the track work goes off somewhere else, maybe on the imaginary side. But the part we've captured is to try and give the essence of a commuter train or works train arriving. It either gets stabled or it simply returns to the main line. There is a crossing from there's a footbridge at an angle, which you can just see about a third of the way from the left, that goes across to an overtrack building. And that would be the route that most of the people would take to go into the factory itself. There would perhaps be gates or a turnstile or something.
And Andy, sorry, Stuart Heesman has just asked, how many sections make up the layout and how long are they? So I take it you mean how many baseboards and what the lengths are? 6
sections, each 4 foot long. So actually it's 24 foot long, not 25. So it crates up, we double them up. So you have like 2 4-foot sections together, and we have 3 of those.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Yeah, so essentially the small spur at the front of the layout is just a loco lay-by siding, and in fact we've just recently added some buildings there, which would be a locoman's bothy or a signing on building, where stock would then obviously change crews perhaps, because obviously it isn't guaranteed that the same crew would always work the return workings, and depending on how busy at the time of day it was. A lot of layouts like this, or a lot of these sort of locations, would have perhaps have huge periods of activity, and then there would be a lull for a period of time. So depending on how the operation is going, you would find that there would be bursts of activity. Obviously, from a layout and operator's point of view, you want to maintain interest to the people who are viewing. So you essentially want to keep something happening all the time. So we do take slight liberties there, but that's the nature of simply the compromises you start to make. In the just moving towards the back scene a little bit, you can see that the crossover point between the industrial sidings and the arrival sidings for the goods is just where the arrow is now, where the mouse is. There's a double slip there which takes the track work into the industrial side. And that would be obviously covered by the works shunter taking the stock from the arrival or the interchange siding, where the interchange siding is the one that's just to the left of that slip now. And it goes underneath that large overbuilding purely because that can also act as a loading facility. So it means that items coming in, such as coal wagons, and again, looking back up at the picture, you can see that there's some 16-ton minerals and some oil tanks on that view. We've catered for both of those on this layout. The oil tanks actually arrive and are shunted just to the right-hand side of the, or just the left-hand side of the overbridge, so just to the right of where the cursor is. But to the left, there is a loop siding at the back with a small covered dock, but the main siding that runs straight along to the end goes through a coal tippler. We'll come back to that in a little while. So I think that gives you a flavour of the construction of the layout, and with taking the detail from the picture, you can see that we've covered the major items coming in. Obviously, the major products going out, of course, are going to be, in this case, completed cars. In the days before car companies simply became assembly plants, they would bring in their raw materials and they would manufacture most things on site in various buildings, which again explains why a lot of the buildings are of different styles or different heights or different shapes. Those are the ones that would be built as the work started to grow. And if you look at the back scene that we have, it does have a lot of varying shapes in terms of the buildings, again trying to reflect the way that these systems in big factory areas would actually grow. Okay, so let's look at some photos now. Let's go to the next slide, please, Jackie. So here we are. There's the photo of the layout of as much as you can see the whole thing. That's in its dressed form at a show, ready to go. And you can see the buildings at the very back in the far top corner, about 1 o'clock. They are effectively the factory buildings of the car plant. And we'll talk about those in a short period of time. You can see the overbridge, and there's a tall chimney just to the left of the tall buildings at the back. So those are the 2 arrival lines just there. And then the bridge acts as a natural scenic break for us to take our loads and our wagons off scene. What you can see in the centre, as I say, are some small additional buildings that are add-ons to the back scene. So we don't have it very much two-dimensional. We've tried to bring a little bit of 3D to it. And the idea there was it represents things like water tanks, pump houses, generating plants, etc., etc. The overbridge, or sorry, the footbridge and the overbuilding represent an extension that obviously would allow some mechanisation to allow them to unload and load wagons in various requirements. So you'll often see that there'll be some illumination inside representing welding and other activities going on inside the factory. So we're trying to bring the scene to life a little. And obviously there is a lot of track on this layout. I think we would agree it tends to be dimensionally fairly flat, but that's typical of a lot of railways. Unless you're modelling, again, a country scene, typically in an urban area, you would generally find there's quite a lot of flat layout tracks. So it's, I won't say we crammed in everything to that fit the space, but we have made the best use, and it is quite busy. And when you see stock running on the layout, it can be quite a busy scene, which is quite nice. So that's a general view of the layouts. What we're going to do now is start to talk through some of the features and why we chose them and what we've used them for. So let's move on to the next slide, please. So here we are. This is the only real list that you're going to see in terms of text, so I won't bore you too much. But we've started to look at individual items. So we're going to talk about the back scene, the chimney, sidings that allow us to transfer items between the industrial and the BR side of the layout. Our tippler, which of course is an attractive thing for everybody, and I know one or two other people have had a hand in that, which is great fun. About the buildings that do come out over the track, and then obviously how we cater for things such as where the locos will be serviced for the industrial side. So there's a small loco shed, a fueling area for either fuel that's arriving to feed plant equipment, or even just to power any, again, industrial locos that are used. And obviously we'll refer to one of those again fairly shortly. The signage was quite interesting. And again, this is quite an interesting one to pick up on as a subject, excuse me, purely because it did actually give us a minor headache at one point that's ably solved by one of our members. And we've started to now develop things like other line side equipment and signalling. So the basic structure of the layout exists, but we are constantly adding small details and cameos and things like that to it. And then, of course, we'll just talk about the locomotives and some of our rolling stock. So those are the points we're going to go through in the next few slides, and you'll see that we should be able to cover quite a bit. So next slide, please, Jackie. Thank you. So back to the track plan just for a moment, very quick. It is compact, but of course it's a compromise compared to the scene that would have been actually seen at Longbridge, particularly because, as you perhaps noticed in that first picture, it had a scissors crossover. Well, anyone who knows anything about O-gauge track, to get to a decent size, the scissors crossover is nearly 2 foot long. So we would have occupied almost half of one of our baseboards just with an ability to cross 2 tracks. So we opted for a slight economy there and chose that we'd use 2 three-way points to give us the maximum ability to fan out, and also obviously a double slip that allowed us a bit more flexibility. Someone's just asked us if we considered a curved baseboard. In this particular sequence, no, we didn't, because it was a fairly linear layout. And again, for exhibition purposes, I'm sure anyone who's organised an exhibition who has been involved, curved layouts are very nice. There's no problem with those at all, except they can be a bit of a headache when you want to lay out an exhibition hall. It's great if you've got something that's got sharp curves and it can be fitted in a corner, but with O-gauge, it's not always as practical as it could be. And to give ourselves the maximum appeal to be able to attend shows, we've actually chosen, like most layouts, they tend to be fairly straight and linear. So that's really the answer to that part of the question. Just touching on the fiddle yard, we use cassettes. We've got pieces of aluminium channel that we use with clip-on brackets to provide the power, and they're in sections that are either long enough for a train, and then there's also a smaller cassette that handles a loco, so it's easy to change stock over either through a small cassette and keep the same stock, whether it's actually turned round or whether it actually has a load fitted to it or whatever. And what we gave ourselves there were 2 loops, and the two loops you can see coming off the three-way point in the middle of the view there. Goes off to obviously the passenger arrival road and the central road, which of course is the release for either of the industrial or the passenger side, and that allows us the ability to run round. And there is a centre head shunt spur at the far left, which gives us the ability to park a loco that might be waiting its turn, or we just want to maybe park some wagons. And frequently you'll see some static wagons on the layout that are bits of stock that maybe don't move for a great deal of time. In this case, we've got a small engineering or works train which sits there quite a lot of the time during the sequence you'll see. But it helps add interest because you're having to not just look straight at the layout. We've tried to add interest where you're looking through things or looking past something. It gives you that feeling of actually being at the line side and seeing something through a narrow vision, e.g. a loco or train in a cutting or a loco coming out of a tunnel, that type of thing. Here it gives us the same. We can dodge past buildings and certain other effects. Okay, Jackie, please, next slide. And here we are. This is our back scene. So we're working our way along the layout from the top left. This is a little nod to some of our rather strange sense of humour. Those of you of a certain age, I'm sure most of us watching tonight are going to remember this. If you ever remember the rise and fall or the fall and rise of Reginald Perrin, he worked for a company called Sunshine Desserts. And the lettering was in this raised style on the front of the building. We've got A. George Engineering, and the reason we've got that is because Alistair George, one of our former members, sadly no longer with us, he was a great driving force behind a lot of the way we do things and a lot of the layouts that we operate, including the ones that you see at other shows. So this was our sort of tribute to him as being an engineering works that would actually have provided perhaps equipment or material to the main car plant, and it's alongside it. So if you're looking at the center image, the top center image, the main building there is a fairly slab-sided wall with a couple of poster boards on it. The front, of course, would be the factory floors, various assembly parts of the plant. The most part of the factory car plant, of course, is off the scene. And what you're seeing here perhaps would be areas where they may be made some of the ancillary parts. Perhaps it would be trimming, seating. Perhaps it would be assembly of smaller items that would then go into the main assembly building. And the building that's A. George Engineering is to the very right of that. So if you're looking to the right of that center picture at the top, that's that same building. And a little nod to Reginald Perrin is the fact that the N in the engineering has actually slipped over to one side. And that was a little trademark that you saw on the Reggie Perrin series from the 1970s.
Just to jump in there, if I don't mind, just those letters and all that were actually made by Dave Cosby.
They were.
So
yes, indeed. They were,
remembers that? Good old Dave.
Laser cut wood, yes.
Yes, indeed.
So they've worked very nicely, and it is something, again, we slightly stole the idea from the former Haysborough layout that the London MRC had, because they had this very nice back scene building of their British Sugar Corporation, and they used a similar style of lettering, and I've always liked it. I just think that standout lettering was a feature very much of the 30s to the 60s on buildings, so it was a nice thing to add, a nice touch. Looking at the very right-hand picture, the right-hand picture is just the end where we close off the end of the layout, and that's just our small head shunt. Looking at the bottom, the signal box, we will come back to the signal box, but it's an ARP design. As you know, during the pre-war era, they were worried about obviously damage to line side structures and obviously important communication centres on railways. So the ARP signal boxes were built very much in a boxy or austere style, with obviously heavy blast protection on something like the roof. And as that isn't modelled very often, we thought that was a nice feature to have. And because of the importance of a car plant, would have obviously been doing war work at the time, it would have been quite right to fit there. So again, that was constructed by three of our members, Mick Boyd, Dave Cosby and Jeremy Everett, worked on that in small groups over a period of time and developed it from, again, laser cut parts. And it's turned out really nicely. The building's illuminated, it's got all the detail inside it, and it's quite a nice little feature. The centre picture is just simply a loading dock. It acts as a buffer siding for our tippler activity. So when we're actually loading and unloading coal at the works, this is where the empty wagons get stored, and occasionally there's vans or something in there as well. And the picture on the right shows the very far left of the layout, if you imagine what I'm saying, and it shows where the tippler and the exchange sidings actually sit. Typically, the line would have gone on. Probably there would have been because Longbridge was obviously a through connection at one point. We chose not to do that. We wanted to self-contain the layout, and this allowed us to generate the back scene. Okay, move on, please, Jackie. Thank you. This is always a favourite conversation piece at exhibitions. It's a standard Skytrex model. We were one of the first layouts to feature this when they introduced it. And we were fortunate enough, we were I won't say sponsored, but we were supported by Skytrex, who gave us an attractive price on the model, which assembles in 3 parts. But we've hollowed it out. That was a very difficult thing to do. We got one of our resident engineering experts to do this for us. We've hollowed out the centre of the chimney so that we can actually let it emit smoke if we want to. And as we say in the text there, a lot of factories that had chimneys at the time, they often used to put their name or their logo on the side of the brickwork. So it obviously it says Ford, and if we rotate the top of the chimney round 180 degrees, the other side says BMC. So it gives us a little bit of dual identity change there, which is nice. But because it's so tall, it really is quite a feature of the layout, and it takes apart. We don't leave it on the layout because obviously it's risk of it being accidentally damaged. Okay, Jackie, please. Okay, so the exchange sidings, you can see there's the centre row and just a wagon parked under the footbridge. But if you look at the right-hand picture, you can see a train of mixed stock arriving. We particularly focus on freight stock. I think it gets more treatment than perhaps a B set or a suburban coach or a DMU, because they don't appear very often, whereas the main task in this area would have been for supporting a factory. It will be obviously industrial movement of goods and equipment in and out. So what you see predominantly is going to be freight, and it gives us an excuse again to run bigger wagons than just rows of vans or mineral wagons. It allows us to have some quite nice bogie detailed wagons that in fact again are mostly Mick Boyd's constructions. And they've got some really interesting loads on them, and I think the loads tend to bring out some general interest. And they're not necessarily going to be car parts, they're going to be parts for infrastructure, because obviously railways at that time brought in so much goods, just material for construction and expansion, plus heavy machinery. So this allows us the ability to bring those out. And again, we would say an exhibition, if you're able to watch the sequence for a period of time, not everyone's going to stand us a layout for 2 hours, but you try and have something of interest that appears relatively quickly so that there's things to watch and hold your interest. Again, a consideration for layouts that you build. How do you hold the interest of a viewer? You can have a timetable sequence, which is great, but it is useful if you've got something that allows you to give a little bit of, oh, I didn't expect to see that type of approach. And then the bottom 2 pictures are again just views of a slightly different angle on the same area. The platform in the left-hand corner picture at the bottom is fairly infrequently used. It would normally spend most of its life deserted, so we deliberately don't have people on it. The layout doesn't contain many people. There are 1 or 2 on the track side, but again, the layout is obviously intended to be a factory sequence. Somebody's just asking us, it's DC or DCC controlled. The layout predominantly is DC. Mainly because it's all the stock that our group have. There is some DCC. We have got members that have DCC, and we have tried the layout, and it does work quite happily with DCC as well. So if we had to connect the other controllers up, we can use it in that mode. But at the moment, the swell of stock and models that we have are predominantly DC. So that's what you're most likely to see at a show. We haven't actually done an exhibition yet with DCC.
No.
We've only tested it ourselves.
DC.
Yeah, and the very bottom right picture, we'll come to a bit more detail in that in a moment, but this shows the spur for the wagons or stock that would be waiting either another shift or another turn to go out. And just to the left of where those box vans are at the front, between that and the signal box, is where you'll see the mainline arrivals. And there's another point that's hidden by the wagons that goes across the front of the factory building that is where there's some parcels vans or some general goods or dry goods perhaps would be delivered. And on the left-hand side of that last bottom right-hand corner picture, you can see a wagon, an oil tank wagon positioned. That's our fueling road. And again, we'll come back to that in a moment. Next slide, please, Jackie. I think one of the main features that's been of interest is the unloading tippler. And if you look at photographs of industrial plants, it doesn't really matter where they were in the country. Quite a lot of them relied on wagon load coal or fuel to be used in their process or their plant. And we were fortunate enough to acquire the tippler from the MRC when they retired the Haysborough layout. And Dave Cosby was the leading light in getting this for us. So we acquired it in a I won't say an unused state, but we got it where we had to do a little bit of fettling work to recommission it, and successfully as well. We've got it working, and it's always a crowd puller. It always was interesting. Subsequent to that, we also, looking back in our research, we were able to find a brochure which was by a company called Mitchell's Tipplers, who actually built these industrial equipment for railways around the world. And fortunately, one of our members, it was his uncle who actually worked for them. Mitchell's are still around, but they don't make obviously this equipment anymore. It's become underfloor, hopper type wagons now. So the art of tipping a wagon on its side and holding it down while you empty the contents is somewhat that has vanished. But certainly if you look at a lot of black and white photos of industrial plants, it was a common feature. And although we haven't got a photographic evidence of anything at Longbridge, there's a very good chance they must have had something. Tipplers were in either rotating tipplers like this, where the wagon is lifted over 90 degrees so it can empty its contents. Sometimes wagons were tipped to their on their end. They would have end loading wagons, and in fact a layout we're developing at the moment will have an end tippler type wagon. It's going to be a static one rather than this one, but the automated sequence that we have with this, once it's started off on a wagon, it takes about 4 minutes for it to raise the wagon, empty it, pause, and it's got suitable sound effects, and it's a very good talking point. And anyone who comes to the layout to see it, it's something that captivates you, and if you come in partway through the sequence, they always want to watch it again. The image on the left is probably representative of what our tippler is representing, and that's taken from that brochure. And if you are at Stafford, we've actually got a large scan of the brochure itself. It covers all sorts of things like locomotive coaling hoppers, industrial bogie wagon tipplers from Australia and South Africa, where they handle 100-foot long wagons, etc., etc. So it's quite big. And someone's just pointing out, yes, the tippler was made by Peter Elmsley, and there's a drawing for it in the back issue of the Railway. So it's quite an interesting feature, and I'm sure everyone enjoys seeing that. If only the ghoulish ones want to see the wagon fall off, which it could never do, or it's going to tip all its contents all over the track, which again, we don't have that. The coal, we use real coal, it does go a little bit everywhere. We do get dust and a lot of muck in it, but it's quite fun to watch. So again, if you're at Stafford or at one of the other shows we're going to be at, hopefully you'll get to see it, and do feel free to come along and ask questions, and we'll gladly invite you around the back of the layout and let you see how it all works, and we can bore you senseless with some of that. Okay, so there's just a couple of other pictures there just showing how the tippler and its location. Typically, it would have been on a longer siding, so wagons would have been pushed through it once they'd emptied and been left at the other side. But in one respect, we had a limited amount of space. So again, the concern was, how do we site this and make best use of it? But it actually meant that we were in a position where we could make an operational feature out of it, where there's a bottleneck. So you can only basically empty 2 wagons at once, and then you have to shunt them away. So it gives us some activity to keep something going on the industrial side, while there's maybe not so much activity on the passenger or the goods arrival side of the layout. So that's quite keen. So, and as being pointed out there, we gave the information from the MRC. We got the information through the MRC library, and Dave Cosby was one of our leading lights on that. So we thank him for the opportunity to still have it and give it a life to carry on another layout. Okay, carry on please, Jackie, next slide. The overtrack building, interesting here. One of the key features of anything like this, warning limited clearance. This would have been quite a hazardous area, much like the tippler. And of course, in the days before the safety nannies or the people that get very worried about what you are and aren't allowed to do, it was very easy to kill yourself on the railway in these days, because if you fell into the pit where the tippler was, or you got trapped between part of the overstructure of this building and wagon movements, clearly wouldn't do your health any good. So things like that are important, and those labels are reproduced on the layout in various places. And what you're seeing here is a view from the top, the side, the back, and just the access to it from the passenger platform. And interestingly, we tend, because of that, the way we build layouts, most of us are the giants. We're looking down on a scene. So you want to see something that's not just a featureless roof of a building. And we've tried to capture that. In the bottom left corner, you can see we've got some oil tanks. So those tanks would be fueling the plant. So the fuel will be delivered maybe by rail. It would be pumped into those tanks, and then the tanks would then be emptied into the plant as required. And obviously the underneath of the building, quite dark, so we've illuminated it so you can see what's going on. And one of our intended features to add is to have some loading. So when the coal wagons have been unloaded, they will be able to pass through this building again, and perhaps they'll take swarf or excess material back out with them. And that's something we're still developing, but it does make a nice scene. And as we said, at the front of it, just the two windows gives us a little bit of activity, so it looks like there's work going on inside. And that part of the building is removable. Again, our layouts, although the back scenes remain, we've made it so that a lot of the buildings actually do lift off, and they're stored separately, but they're very easy to add and move. The only risk with that, of course, is the fragility of things like the footbridge, which is a York model making. It's a wood cut, laser plastic cut model, but it is extremely fragile, and we've gone to a number of efforts to try and strengthen it up to make it exhibition proof so it can be handled, but it's still a fairly flimsy sort of structure. Okay, pressing on. The loco shed, this is an interesting one. Austin Works, if you look at the picture on the left, that shows one of the Austin ex-USA tanks. It's not one of the BR ones. They bought it directly from the USATC. There were two, I think they had. One was called Ada 2, which is this one, and I think the other one was number 5. So this one's quite interesting because we want to have an industrial loco for the Austin side, and that presents an ideal unit to run because it's got a compact wheelbase. The building you can see behind it is modelled. Actually, again, the building that we've used, the one in the centre image, did again come from the Haysborough layout that the MRC used, and we've transplanted it and adapted it. But doesn't it look so much like the building that's behind that USA tank? So that's quite a nice feature that we've plumbed in to get it there. So that's quite good. And the bottom picture just shows one of our industrial locos that maybe our members got that we brought along just to park there and run. And you'll see various locos, but quite a lot of them typically are small industrials of various sorts. Okay, move on, please. This is the opposite side now to the loco, to that small loco shed. You can just see it in the left-hand picture, just above the diesel. And this is our Ford diesel that obviously when we're running a Ford sequence, this loco appears, built by AEI and another equipment company based on an American boxcar design. And it ran at Dagenham for many, many years. There were two of them, and they both worked and shunted their trains accordingly. The engine inside the locomotive was built by W.H. Allen of Bedford, so not, again, a local connection for us. And our loco does have a full interior detail. So if you see it at an exhibition, do ask us, we'll lift the roof off and you can see the inside. And we've carefully hidden the real motor, if you like, but you see a representation of the engine. The loco was preserved, one of the locos was preserved. It went to the Kent and East Sussex Railway, and a group of us went down there to measure it up and take photos of it. And we then got a guy called Simon Bolton, who again was a friend that we got to know through the MRC, and he was able to scratch build that to a very high standard. I think it's full credit to him. And when you see the loco in the flesh, it really is a stunning model. It's not particularly powerful, but then again, the real one wasn't either. But it's ideal for doing shunting and moving small wagon stock about, and it always causes interest. And we often park it very often where you see that Esso wagon in the larger picture. So it's it often parked there, either because it might be being refueled, or it would just be parked because people like to see it. It's often a question we get asked. Again, so next slide, please. Okay, this is the one that was interesting. I think that, again, highlights your research and what you should and shouldn't do. Because we can operate two sequences, we have BMC or Ford. And again, lettering, highlight lettering that you saw on big scaffolding, that middle picture at the top shows the boiler house and the generating plant at Dagenham with the large Ford logo. And obviously we've reproduced that, again, through the excellent help of Dave Cosby. We got those fretted out, and that sits on a frame, and it plugs into the top of the roof, and we can swap it for the one that says BMC. So the layout changes its identity at that point. And coincidentally, the two poster panel boards, which you see in the picture just below the Ford lettering, the right-hand one changes from being a Ford Anglia to a Mini or Austin 1100 or something, just to reflect the stock. And typically we might change a few of the road vehicles that appear on the overbridge. So it's just a nice feature. But what we did need to find was, obviously we had to seek permission from Ford to use their logo, because of course it's still a current logo for them. So we actually had to write to them and ask them. And again, Dave Cosby stepped to the fore with his prolific prose and managed to get them to agree to doing it. We had to explain obviously what it was for, because they really hadn't got any idea why a group of people building a model railway would want to use a Ford logo. So we had to explain it, and we have permission. BMC was slightly different because it's no longer current and it's been subsumed so many times. So there wasn't quite the requirement for that. But all we're really saying there is, if you ever do decide to model a real place, do just check with yourselves or whoever might be the successors of the company. Some are much more litigious than others. So it's worth just being aware of that. But we have a letter from Ford that says we have permission. So all good. Okay, move on. Thank you. So we're adding at the moment, this is our development of signalling and line-side equipment. I'm just looking at the clock as well, and I'm well aware that I'm way over time, but Andy's looking very relieved here because it means he's got less time to have to talk about. But we're just speeding through this. Okay, so what you're seeing here is obviously another picture of the signal box. A couple of our model guys, Jeremy and Mick, busy working on the building of that. And then just the characters and the figures and the telecommunication information equipment. This was mainly built by Les Sims, as one of our other members. He's got quite a flair for doing line-side equipment, telegraph poles and such like. So what you're seeing there is just how we started to implement those. And as far as we are aware, they are correct to the type of positioning they would have had to communicate with the signal box for shunting movements and so on. And what you're seeing in the underbuilding, if you look at the center lower picture, what you're seeing there is obviously there is some signaling, even on the industrial side, to warn stock or people when there may be activity that would prevent movement. So again, we're trying to make sure that we've covered that correctly. They don't change color very often, but they are active. And even though they're underneath, you don't always see them, but they are there. It's a bit like putting detail in a carriage or a loco. You don't always see it, but you have the satisfaction of knowing it's around. So it just depends on how deep you want to go. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, oh, someone's asking about the track work. It's a mixture of Pico and Markway track, developed obviously to suit the radii and the features that we have. Our locomotives, obviously we've already covered the Ford diesel, but I have a particular passion for early 50s prototypes and diesels. So you'll see some of the very early diesels, particularly some of the experimental types. So very often, although we wouldn't have categorical evidence that the line actually had this stock running on it, things like the 10,800, which is the bottom right hand picture, showing it just stabled at head shunt there, that did run between Rugby, Birmingham and Norwich on freight work. So it's quite conceivable that it could have run through Birmingham on a cross country train. A typical lightweight DMU, obviously, the Ford diesel, the early BTH Type 1, and it's a diesel brake tender, which again you don't see on many layouts, but it's a feature of stuff that highlighted obviously the braking force of a diesel loco was different to a steam loco, and consequently it gave us a reason to have an excuse to run that on longer trains. And one of the early shunters, I'm particularly keen on early shunters. So you'll see the bottom left-hand picture shows a jackshaft shunter, which again, they were very prevalent around the Birmingham area. So a lot of people who see it say, oh, it's an 08. But of course, there's a lot more story behind that. And if you want to be bored sideways, then do talk to us at a show. Okay, move on, please, Jackie. This is probably near the end now. This is our output, if you like. The car factory produces whatever model of vehicle was going to be made there. And if it's the Ford plant, it will be Ford Zodiacs or Ford Capris or Ford Anglias, something like that, Ford Consols. So you'll see those on the car flats. The car flats are, is it Ragstone or is it Radley models? I can never remember which. Ragstone, yeah. So we've got 4 of those, and you'll see there'll be 2 loaded and 2 unloaded that will come out with the various vehicles on. And we've equally got a rake of Austin Minis, Austin 1100s that we would use for the Austin sequence. So they cause quite a bit of interest to see. One problem we did face, because of the fairly tight point work that most of us have on layouts, the length of these wagons meant that when negotiating a snake through the track work, we did experience a fair bit of buffer lock, and that was solved by some longer wire soldered across the buffers. So that's the way we got round to solving that, and that helped avoid derailments and so on and so forth. So the car flats are certainly a very popular sequence for people to see, and that obviously just shows they don't appear very often, but they are often around. So there we go. Thank you very much, Andrew. Nice of you to come along. Thank you. Okay, so that really is a snapshot of Central Works. It's a tight location. We made compromises, but I think we've captured the essence of an industrial railway. So if we now move quickly on, we're going to look at the next layout. So next slide, please, Jackie. So this is Harpenden. We're going to talk about that. Andy Ward is the creator of this. And really, again, it gave us a mix of London, Midland and Eastern Territory, because obviously the boundary was at Harpenden. It gave us a fairly good range of stock over the years to run. Quite a large area to model. Andy will explain all this between the nice scenic brake structures. And as we said earlier, it would have been a good connection to have existed between the main lines. When something like the knitting comes down or there's delays on a line, they could have run into the other termini, but not quite so easy now because the other branch lines all face the wrong way. This would have been easy. But anyway, Andy, I'll hand over to you, let you talk for a bit, and we'll move quickly on. So,
okay, thanks very much, Nigel. Excellent talk. Right, so basically, why does a confirmed Great Western aficionado build a small X Great Northern / London North Eastern branch line? The answer is easy. I was born in Harpenden. Became a train enthusiast at a very early age, thanks to my dad, and I can just about remember the station before it was all demolished. I was born in February 1965, and the line closed in April 1965. However, goods trains continued to run up and up the branch until November of that year. That was when a connection was put in just south of Luton, Midland, to actually join up with the ex-Great Northern Line, just south of what was then Bute Street Station. It was not until 1968 that the station was pulled down, and I can remember as a 3-year-old sitting on the edge of the platform pretending to be waiting for a train a week or 2 before the bulldozers come along. It was many years later when I managed to build the layout, which was only 40 feet at first. So only. I always planned to build a layout with both bridges at either end, so there would be a natural boundary between the layout and the fill yards. One end is Station Road Bridge, which is still there, and the other end is Westfield Bridge, which sadly is still there, but completely filled in. And in 1969, 1970, after it was filled in, they put a little close in and named it Beeching Close. So not very good there. Once I had the plan, it quickly became obvious that 40 feet was not going to be enough. So soon 40 became 44, then 48, and so on until now it is 56 feet long. I really tried to keep the size down, but to make the layout as accurate as possible, it had to grow. I wanted to build the layout to represent the 1930s, which can also be ran into the 1950s, providing a good mix of stock. The only difference between the years was the name to the station, from Harpenden to Harpenden East. This was in September 1950. All the gas lamps had also become electric, Those of you who know Harpenden, there used to be two stations in Harpenden. One was Harpenden, Great Northern, and one was Harpenden Midland. Well, obviously, before they all become BR, if you wanted to send any parcels to them, you just send Harpenden Midland or Harpenden Great Northern, London North Eastern. But when it became BR, there wasn't any segregation. It was just Harpenden. And a lot of parcels ended up at the wrong station. Now, bearing in mind, that, as I've said, that both stations were actually on Station Road, about a mile apart. So on the 25th of September 1950, British Rail changed the name of Harpenden, the layout I built, to Harpenden East. And the main station, the Midland station, become Harpenden Central. So that alleviates all sorts of problems. All the buildings I've made are all scratch built. There's no kits or anything of the signal box, the goods shed, or the station building itself. And these were all mostly using Slater's plasticard.
Move on a slide, please, Jackie.
Thank you.
And the next one as well, please. There we are. That's the view of Harpenden.
Right, okay. After 1968, the whole site was developed into housing, and now there is absolutely nothing left. I am grateful to Sue and Jeff Woodward for a lot of their help with the pictures of the station. Jeff and Sue Woodward used to have a museum in Harpenden where they'd collected a lot of the, believe it or not, signals, the signposts, lamps and all that. And it had quite a varied collection. Unfortunately, health and safety rules meant that they could not continue with their exhibition in their garden, and unfortunately had to close. So, which is a shame. But anyway, here you can see a picture. This is taken from the coach. I take it as probably a Midland, a northeastern wooden teak coach, looking northwest towards Luton. So it's actually going down the branch. The main building was on the upside, and you can see in the distance a very large goods shed. That remained until 1963. Next picture, please, Jackie. Okay, here you can see two class.
They're 25s.
They're 25.
24, actually.
24, sorry. These weren't very often used up the line. I very, very rare pictures of these actually coming up. But you can see there it's got a 3-car passenger unit. You can see the goods, the signal box on the extreme right-hand side. And Station Road Bridge at the back, which is still there now. There's the signal box was built by Mackenzie and Holland, built to a standard design in about 1830, I believe. No, 1860, sorry. And it had a 30 frame lever. It's quite a spacious box for its size. And on the left-hand side, you can see the somersault signal. That's the down starter. They're all somersault signals, and they remained like that right until the very end, which is a bit of a bugger to model, trying to get them to move. But anyway, next picture, please. Right, here we can see in about 1960, I believe this is the 08 that was shedded at Hatfield. And you can see here they're actually relaying and reballasting a lot of the track work. This picture would have actually been taken. No, who was built? Yes, Luton, who was built on the same line. You can see quite clear now. This was taken from Station Road Bridge, looking towards Wheathampstead, so going up the line. You can see quite clearly the two tracks deviated into one line. And I say this was taken around 1960 when all the track was reballasted and relayed. Next picture, please, Jackie. Right, this is a lovely picture. This was taken in 1930. This is of an inspection saloon going down the branch towards Harpenden. You can see quite clearly this was taken from the signal box, and you can see quite clearly, you can see quite some distance right down. And from the signal box, you could actually see Westfield Road Bridge.
Quite straight, wasn't it?
Yeah, it is very straight and very level. it actually was built on an embankment all the way along to Westfield, where it went to a cutting and under the bridge.
Interesting point to make. The coach, of course, still exists. It's on, I think it's the one on the Bluebell Railway, which is the inspection
Right.
saloon.
Okay.
I believe it's still there.
And to the right of the picture, you can actually see the large sign Harpenden, which I've managed to mimic and what have you. The station itself was a two-story building where the top story was where the station master lived. And you can just about see the doors are open of the goods shed. One other thing to be mentioned here is, although railways were quite prominent, they still couldn't stop right of way, passengers right of way or footpaths. And just coming from, you can't quite see it, but just the other side on the platform, on the up platform, there was a set of steps coming down, and you could actually have right of way along the platform, and where the cursor is now, there's a foot crossing, and up to this side. And if Jack can just move the cursor just ever so slightly to the left, there was a gate here. You could, you had the right of way to walk along the platforms, over the railway line, and back up the other side and through the footpath. Even the railways could not stop
And
the
there
right
is
of way.
signage to reflect that.
The signage, if I remember, it actually says, look both ways before crossing or something. I've got it actually. But anyway, next picture, please, Jackie. This is a marvelous picture. This was taken.
Yeah, that's just about there.
This is taken around about the Edwardian period. We think these three gentlemen are off to London or somewhere. We think one of them's got a camera and one of them's got a radio. We can't actually make sure. But the lovely thing about this picture is, if you look at the signal box, you can actually see the steps are actually coming down from the signal box to the track, or almost onto the track. Well, in 1920, or around the 1920s, the steps are actually changed to actually go onto the platform. Now, this, I believe, was due to health and safety, because it's quite a bit of a blind spot there. But that's the only reason I can think of why they changed the steps. Next picture, please, Jackie. Right, this is nice. Here, this is what it says: do not cross over until the train has departed. Look both ways. This is because, as I say, you could have the right of way to go up and down the platforms and cross over the railway line.
Quite extensive goods facilities as well, aren't they?
You can see the reason why my layout is so long, because this is taken from the end of the down platform, and you can see quite clearly the goods shed in the distance. And there was a cattle dock coming from that just on the right hand side. Now, this was a major problem that I had, because when I first built my layout, I built the cattle dock far too short. So I've now had to make a 2-foot extension to increase the cattle dock. So as I said, it used to be 54, it's just now 56 foot long. The goods shed was a very, very busy goods shed. It used to take manure from London Zoo, which would then be carted around to the local greenhouses. There was one called Randall's Nurseries, which used to take a lot of manure. They would grow their tomatoes, cucumbers, and all in their extensive greenhouses. And around there was an awful lot of greenhouses that produced goods and what have you. So coal and manure would come up from London, and obviously the goods would then come out. It was a very, very, very busy goods shed. But like everything else in the 1950s, cheaper imports meant that places like Randall's Nurseries closed, and obviously the goods also began to die out. And in 1963, the goods shed was demolished, no longer needed. Next picture, please, Jackie. Right, this is a very interesting picture because I believe this no, this was definitely from London Zoo. It come up from London Zoo. This is a class 20 taking a load of 16-ton minerals. I think this is possibly the very last revenue working train up the line in November 1965. Luton at the time was still heavily dependent on the railways because it had its gasworks, it had its coal plants, it had Vauxhalls. It was still very, very heavily used. And until a connection was put in the south of Luton, the line still had to be used. They still needed to get parts up from the main line that come off at Welwyn Garden City. So up until the end of 1965, the train still ran. And I believe this is the very last train. Again, it's a lovely picture there of the somersault signal, which I've built and made for my layout. Next picture, please, Jackie. Right, this is a class 105 DMU. As you can see by now, this was probably taken in 1964 because the goods shed is now completely gone. All the sidings have been taken up. Very, very little lift infrastructure. And the class 105 DMUs ran up the line until virtually the last day. Very, very widely used trains, mostly on the eastern region, I believe, Nigel.
Yeah,
if
yeah,
you can
a lot
say it.
worse than Midland ones, but mostly east.
Yeah, mostly eastern. So next picture, please, Jackie. Right, this is possibly the same train going through Harpenden. As you can see, it's now on the up platform. You can see the signal box on the right hand side, the station build on the left hand side. Now you can see the track actually goes downhill slightly underneath, as I say, Station Road Bridge. Station Road Bridge is still there, but the rest of this is all being filled in and built on. As I say, there's absolutely nothing left. Do
we not think the platforms are buried? We think they might still be.
Yes, some of the platforms would have been buried.
Yeah.
When they actually filled in the cutting, because when they filled the cutting and actually put houses on either side, but the other side of the station, the track bed and all that was completely taken out. That's now Waveney Road. So there was 2 minutes 105.
Yes, there was.
Yes, there is. Yeah. Okay, next picture, please, Jackie. Right, this is the layout as I was progressing in many stages. The picture on the left is actually the far end of the station, far end rather of the layout. You can see it's just about to go under what was Westfield Bridge, and that was on the embankment. In the middle, you can actually see there's Ox Lane Bridge. Well, Ox Lane Bridge is still there. Sorry, the picture on the left hand side, please, Jackie. Come down a little bit. That's it, just there. This is Ox Lane Bridge. That is still there now, and all the embankment is still there, and it's now part of a national cycle route number 6, so you can actually walk along it or cycle along it. The picture in the middle is now taken from what I would call Station Road Bridge, and you can just about see the embankment and the platforms being built as I went along. And on the third picture on the right hand side, you can see that the platforms are slowly taking shape and and the runaround loop and the track for the goods shed in the distance.
Notice it's in the garden because you couldn't get it all in the house.
Oh yes. I mean, I've had to have there's 2 problems building anything in the garden. First of all, if it's a sunny day, you don't want it too sunny because it completely destroys everything. And obviously, if it rains, even worse. So you have to be very careful. And most of this was built in sections during sort of April, May time, and then late August, September time when the sun wasn't so hot. Otherwise, it would destroy everything. Next picture, please, Jackie. Okay, again, these are just pictures as I was progressing along. You can see Westfield on the left-hand side. Westfield Road Bridge is now coming into shape. The embankments are coming in. And of course, the problem whenever you build a layout, if you have two cuttings on either end and an embankment, it's very awkward to build. So actually, one of the boards is actually, three of the boards are actually lower than the preceding parts of the layout. So whenever we put this up, this is always an Achilles heel to try and get this set up correctly. It's a bit of a nightmare at times, and many hands are needed to try and get it set up. In the middle, you can quite see that you can see this is the far end. One track comes into two. This is Westfield Road end, which is right the other end of the layout, which you can just about see the bridge from the signal box. And on the right hand side, you can see it's slowly coming on, grass embankments and some ballasting taking place. Next pictures, please. Right, here we are, slowly getting there. These are pictures that I think you've probably seen on the website, quite clearly showing a J1 pulling the goods train, and I think in the distance you've got a C12 pulling a goods coaching stock. The signal box obviously all built. The little white building in the middle is actually a lamp hut. You can see there, and obviously that's where they used to keep all the lamps and whatever. And just the other side of it is the steps. Now these steps are the ones that you could take and walk along the platforms over the other side and walk up onto the other platform. Again, the railways couldn't stop the right of way. I don't know why they never built a footbridge. Maybe it's expense, not sure, but you was always allowed to walk along the station. Very strange. The middle picture again, just another picture as I progressed, and of course the picture on the right hand side is a bit better one of the signal box itself. Again, as I say, it's a Mackenzie and Holland built. Next slide, please, Jackie. You can actually see a bit more of it now. You can see that's how it's all built, slowly coming to shape. Again, it's all scratch built. You can't buy kits of this. And there's a lovely picture there of the steps actually coming down. As I said before, in one of the other pictures, the steps were to the side and come down to track level. You can see quite clearly now the steps are actually coming down onto the platform itself. Again, that may be health and safety, not sure, but they changed the layout design. And again, the third picture, you can see it's more or less in its entirety. Again, when I tend to take the layout to an exhibition, I tend to have the half of the roof taken off so people can see the levers and see all the clocks and the bells and all that and the whistles and everything in that was associated with the signal box. Next picture, please, Jackie. Right, here we are. This is the station building. Again, this was all scratch built. One thing I did find was trying to gauge it and trying to get the size. Now, fortunately, I found a picture of the very end. If you could just point to the very left end, Jackie, you can see there that there's the toilet window and what have you. I actually found a picture which showed the bricks quite clearly. So I actually counted the bricks. That's the only way I could get a gauge. So there was like 50 bricks along. So that was my basis of the layout. As like everything was all built from plasticard. The only thing is now a lot of the plasticards began to bend. I wished really I'd made it out of wood and use plasticard on top. But as you can see, everything was all scratch built here. The chimneys, the windows I bought, but obviously I had to do the bay window. The roof, everything was all scratch built. It really was a labor of love. I really enjoyed it. Next picture, please, Jackie. Right, here's yours truly. Now this, I believe, was the last time it was out at Alexandra Palace. You can see quite clearly here, the signal box has only got half its roof on, so people can actually look and see, and people do, they really comment on it. And also, if you look at the goods shed, there's also a big hole in the roof there. Again, it's, you know, I have the platform with goods in it, and it had a crane, a small crane in it. And again, people love looking in and seeing things inside it. you can see here it's almost in its entirety. You can see why now it's so long. Again, you can see the steps leading down from the path, which again you had to go along all the way along the up platform and cross over the other side. And there's obviously another building at the back of the station. I'm not sure exactly what that was for, maybe for storage or something, I'm not sure, but there's sort of a basic overview of the station as it is. So next slide, please, Jackie. Well, this concludes my look at Hertfordshire and Bedfordshire, the look at our cross-country branch line. If there's anything that you want to know, anything you want to ask, I'm always happy to share my thoughts and share things with you. But it's been a labour of love. I really have thoroughly enjoyed building this. And I'm grateful for the guys to help me out taking it out, because obviously a layout this size, you need a minimum of 4 people, more often 6 people if they can. And I'm ever so grateful for all the help that people give me. So thank you very much.
Okay, so yeah, it's Harpenden East will be seen at the Severn Valley Railway. They're doing their model event at the end of September. So if you get the chance, come along to that. It's at the Engine House at Highley. There are special tickets available for travel on the train, which always include admissions to various things. So you get a discount if you're a guild member as well. It's on there. We've got some information on the web pages, and it's in the latest magazine, in the Guild Gazette and in the Guild newsletter. So you will be able to see it, and various of us will be there to tell you more about it. Okay. So just quickly, obviously we're conscious that we are a bit behind on time. My fault, I think, probably talking too much. We just moved to our third segment, which is the diorama that we constructed. So this is, again, a collective work from a group of us. We started this in 2012, obviously very specific, a very focused location. It's quite amazing that it's a diorama, so obviously nothing moves, but there's only one train in view. I'm sure you all know what the subject is. It was unfortunately the 8th of August, 1963, 3 in the morning, and of course it was the Great Train Robbery. But the important thing for us to say here is we never set out at any point to glorify the robbery. We don't condone the actions of what happened. We simply wanted to model a snapshot in time that had an element of interest, and particularly to pick up on the element of the railway. We do not feature any personalities in it. There are no people have said to us when they've seen the model, which one is whatever character it may be. We've said, we don't know. We're not focused on that at all. We're simply showing what happened, and we researched the history. One of the reasons we chose it, apart from it to coincide with what was then the 50th anniversary, and of course next year it's going to be the 60th, so this is a 10-year-old work for us. We tried to pick up on the story of what actually happened in the build up to it. We only focused on the railway parts. We didn't take any interest in anything else other than the scene itself. But because it was a crime scene, it meant that the photographic evidence is probably the best you will ever get from an event. And I'm not advocating that you should look to model these types of things. And we would never, ever have considered modeling anything to do with a railway accident or anything like that. That was never our intention at all. So we are very clear on that. It was done purely as a modeling exercise, and a diorama, which made it much more interesting as the detail, and it was one of our most detailed works, but it also gave us an opportunity to explore some theatrical parts as well. So if we move on to the next slide, please, Jackie. Here's the scene that we actually set out to create. This is an aerial shot taken by the newspapers of the time, looking down on the west side of the lane that runs under Bridego Bridge. And you can see there's a large lake, which in fact now has grown in size quite a lot. But the lake at that time is quite prominent. So we featured that on the layout, of course. And just above it, you can see there's a lowish retaining wall, which is obviously the point where the mailbags and so on were loaded. The key thing about this, of course, it was on the southern side, or it's in Bedfordshire. It's not that far from where we live. It's at a place called Linslade, and the the line, of course, was being electrified in the move of the electrification down to London. By this time, as you can see, the masts are up, but of course there were no catenary, and that made a big difference for us. So you'll see, just as we whip through the last couple of slides, you'll see as to how that actually was useful to us. So next slide, please, Jackie. So research was the key thing here. We pored over maps. We went to the places and looked around. We researched. Obviously, we had to research something about the road vehicles that we used, the Austin Lodestar lorry, the 2 Land Rovers at the scene. We obviously had to have some figures, but again, I'd stress they were nondescript. But the main thing was the track work, the catenary, the telegraph poles. Obviously, telegraph poles are something that really is not seen very much unless you're on secondary lines now, and most of them aren't in use, of course. But at the time, that was the communication route. So again, it was featured very highly in the theory and the research, and also obviously the formation of the train. Obviously, we're only showing a small part of it because the train was segmented, and again that helped us because it kept the size down. The overall size of the diorama is just over 9 feet. About 3 foot wide. So it was just 2 board sections, and we were able to put it into a nighttime scene. So this gave us our theatrical part that gave us the opportunity to depict it, if you like, at the moment that the event occurred. So it was very much something that gave us the ability to have a moonlight or a dark environment, which again you don't generally see at exhibitions. So we had a black gazebo, which also was quite good because it did mean that people who perhaps preferred not to view us it wasn't in their face. If they wanted to come in and see it, they could. If they wished to pass us by, then they were quite free to do so. And we were very careful about that. And we did make a point of having rehearsed what we would do if people were concerned about the if you like, the event and why we'd done it and why that was really something we should or shouldn't have done. We were very careful to rehearse how we would deal with that. And I'm pleased to say, in the main, most people accepted it for what it was. It was a snapshot in time. It was a modeling diorama, and the event was purely there because that's what happened in history. It was never anything else. And I think we've stuck with that, and it has proved to be successful. Of course, there will be people that were unhappy with it. I hope we hoped change some minds. We did at least allow people to see it, even some that were perhaps a little bit unhappy with us at the start. They realized once they'd seen the presentation that there was actually we were telling a story, but we were not glorifying what happened. So we had a commentary. It ran for about 4.5 minutes. Then there was questions and just general chat to people. We had a montage of photographs on panels outside the display. So it was very much an information point for people to see, and I'd have to say it was very successful. Can we move on to the next slide, please, Jackie? There's us doing the research, a mob of us wandering up and down a field, measuring distances between catenary and telegraph poles as best we could. For the very most part of it, we were able to do it on public rights of way and footpath. There was maybe one minor incursion for a quick look at the top of the bridge just to see what the ballast looked like and something like that. But the main thing that was interesting was the right-hand picture, which was, of course, the catenary. And we'll come back to the catenary in a bit, but that was one of the main features that we had to scratch build on the layout. And of course, the picture you see there is actually modern catenary. It's the one that was taken on the night of our research. So it's not how it quite looked, and certainly doesn't look like that now. Next slide, please, Jackie. So here we are at the beginning of our sort of construction phase, the scenic work, top left-hand side. We were just positioning the bridge, and Andy built the bridge. And I think, do you want to mention a bit about the positioning of the bridge, Andy?
Yeah, basically, when I was asked to do the
I haven't got it.
when I was asked to do the diorama, I sort of jumped at the chance. That was my first mistake. Never volunteer. Basically, what happened was we decided that we were going to build 2 boards. Both of them would be 3 foot by 4 foot, 4 foot wide by 4 foot length by 3 foot wide. And the idea was that the main central point, main focal point, was always going to be the bridge. And I wanted to put the bridge in the middle. However, if I put the bridge in the middle of the layout, there wouldn't have been enough room for the train. So the train then became the central point, and the bridge was moved ever so slightly to the right. Now, as you can probably see by the layout, the road doesn't actually run at 90 degrees under the bridge. The track bed is a slight angle, which meant it gave me more room to actually put the vehicles. The next problem I found when we actually did a recce was the abutments are curved. Now that caused no end of problems because it took me about 3 attempts to get them right. And also you'll notice that they're different lengths.
The next slide, please, Jackie. I'll show that Andy's referring to a little bit better.
Right, you can see there, as I was building the layout, the abutments are slightly curved. I had to use ply, bendy ply, whatever it's called.
Yeah, it's got a
particular name to it. Flexible ply. I had to use 3 sheets glued together, and I had to make them. I had to make a former up to keep the shape while it dried out. And again, as I say, it took me 3 attempts to get that and to get it right, but I think it worked out well. And as you can see by the picture on the bottom left, you can see the brickwork is now on, Slater's brickwork, and the handrails are on the top now. Yeah? And by now you can see it was coming on. The embankments are made of polystyrene to try and keep the weight down. But again, it's like it was a labour of love. I really enjoyed doing this because, as I say, it's a factual place. You can actually go to it, and the bridge is still there. It's still the same. So I just managed to take many pictures and whatever and sizes. And as you can see, as the pictures progressed, the scenic side of it was done mostly by Jeremy, who was basically an excellent modeler. It's bordering professional. It really was. It turned basically a toy into a proper model. He did an amazing job. But it really was a labour of love, and spent many hours building this. Really enjoyed it.
Okay, next slide, please, Jackie. Just a couple of little features. As we mentioned earlier, the catenary was one of their main features. We had to build that, not quite from scratch. We were able to get some etches from a company called N Scale Brass. Obviously, they do a lot of smaller scales, but they do O-gauge catenary, which we were able to modify and build up. And you can see the bottom picture there. There's a photograph of the catenary, and then the one that we build. And we added this every time we erected the diorama. We would add the catenary and add all the telegraph poles. And even things like the detail of the telegraph poles. Les Sims, who built all this, I built the catenary, but Les did all the telegraph poles. We even had to go and count the cross arms to make sure we got the right ones. So a site visit is absolutely vital on these things, even when we're having to work from photographs, just to get the positionings so we could get it right. So even though there's only 2 catenary masts, there were actually 8 telegraph poles, and we added a few smaller features. And we discovered as well that the track work, you can't just lay plain track, although we've got part of our work shows the layout being built, and you can see there's track work. We of course discovered that studying the photographs, one line of the track was actually concrete sleepered, because all the others were wood. So we had to go and assemble our sets of track. Next slide, please, Jackie. Quickly moving on to the road vehicles. 2 Land Rovers. These were from the Vanguard's range, and the Austin Lodestar lorry was the one from Langley. They were not, well, apart from detailing the Land Rovers, the Austin Lodestar was a bit of a difficult model to make because it was fairly poor coloured castings, but that's, I think, because the model is getting rather old. But we added some lighting. We had them powered on the layout to bring it to life a little bit. We would accept that. I don't suppose if you were robbing something, you'd leave the headlights on a vehicle you were parked there, because you wouldn't want to attract attention. But it did allow us to show some element of activity and bring the scene a little bit to life. But really, they blended into the scenery. That was the key thing. When you look at the overall picture, what you see is the scenic work, and the lake. It was done with magic water and the varnishes that you can get, and the quality of the lake with all its foliage and everything around it. Unfortunately, one thing we don't have is a picture of the lake on its own. We should have done that, but I'm sure we just couldn't put it together with these. But the scale and the quality of the modelling, Andy rightly says, Jeremy, who did this, he'd really got an eye for it, and it made the train almost become a secondary part of the display. The display was always shown as a crate. We didn't actually invert model sections of the baseboards. We just carried it on two sort of bedstead style trestles, and then we carried everything else in a vehicle around it.
Thank you, Keith.
So there we go. Next picture, please, Jackie. Quickly on the rail vehicles, the mail coach, each of the diagrams of the mail coaches were separate, so we had to build the exact one, and it's built from a Westdale kit, and the proprietor of Westdale actually did make some changes to the kit to accommodate what we had, so it was very good. The 50-foot LMS BG in the center top picture, that's just a normal coach. I think it was a sidelines kit, and it was then weathered and adapted. We added some strapping and some other things to make it look, and of course we correctly numbered them. And yes, somebody's just saying in the film, did they use a class 37? The one that was on the TV was a 37, which of course was incorrect. And I just put that down to poor or sloppy casting, if you like, because they went to the Keighley and Worth Valley Railway to make the model, and they could have to do the filming, when they could have used the East Lancs, which had a class 40, and virtually everybody else knows it was a Type 4 Lynch electric diesel that was used. Obviously the one we had was a just like the real thing kit, and that was built by myself. Mick Boyd built the 50-foot full brake, and it was a joint effort, but mostly Jeremy Everett again for building the post office coach. One thing about the post office coach, the TPO was slightly different because of course it didn't carry netting, it didn't have the retrieval and dispatch apparatus on it. It was just the coach, but it did obviously contain the high value packages. And at the end of it, when the 7 years was up, after all the legal stuff had died down and the event was over, the coach was stored at Wolverton for quite a long time. Because of its sensitive nature, it was taken to King's scrapyard on the east coast, near Norwich, and it was deliberately burnt. And the photograph we've got in the centre bottom there shows the end of that coach. It was deliberately destroyed to avoid souvenir hunters or any other people that tried to glorify out of it. And I think that was the right thing to do. So yeah, and in fact, Dave's just pointing out the head code figures. We deliberately tried to get the loco exactly right. And the one thing, of course, everybody remembers was, sadly, Jack Mills was the one who was injured quite badly in this. But we very carefully made sure that there was nobody in the cab. Our model did not depict the crew of the loco. That was done out of a mark of respect. We did actually meet the nephew of the second man, David Whitby. His nephew actually did come and view the diorama, and I really felt this was our comeuppance. I thought this was going to be the time when we were going to get a lot of a problem, but he listened, he watched and read all the display, and then he came up and he said he felt he learned something, and he was actually quite moved by it. And we simply apologized and said, look, we're sorry, we have never meant to cause offense. And he said, none taken. So if anything, that was quite gratifying. But the amazing thing about this diorama was the amount of people that came to talk to us that were either involved in the post office, involved in the railway of some description, or the police, yeah. And they had a lot to say. And of course, like anything, it's a bit like if you write a book. Once you display what you've got, more information suddenly appears. And if only we'd had that to start with, it would have enhanced what we'd done quite a lot. But there we go. That's just one of those things. Next slide, please, Jackie. What we had to do, the last part of this really, was how to bring it to life, how to make it so that it was a piece of entertainment for people to watch and to be interested. So we created a commentary. And in fact, Simon Bolton, a friend of Dave Cosby's again, he has quite a good theatrical voice, and he was able to do the commentary for us, which we scripted, and we were then able to play that as a sound file. And what you're looking at on the left is simply the box of electronics that ran it all. Once we pressed the button to start it, the computer took over, it dimmed the lights, it talked about the introduction, it gave the platitudes that we were talking about, we apologize for the scene, etc., but we're telling the story. And then we start to bring the story to life. We had a soundtrack for the owls hooting and the loco's soundtrack of the engine running and so on. And gradually during the presentation, the lighting would gradually come up as if it was getting light in the morning, which was one of the governing factors of how the robbery nearly didn't take place correctly, because there was still activity on the track. The robbers were severely outclassed in terms of the amount of material necessary or they had to move, the people that were there that didn't quite do the job they should have done. I'm not condoning it. I'm just simply talking about the facts. And of course, a lot of the evidence that they left, which we were able to pick up from the photographs. So we were fortunate that this was one of the most widely documented things that we could research, and it was very, very successful. Okay, next slide, please, Jackie. So really, this is just a quick wrap up of this, and we're very conscious we've run over time. When we produced this, one of the things that happened was BRM contacted us, and they devoted 9 pages to a diorama, which I think was quite stunning, given that, you know, most layouts get that type of coverage in a magazine, but such was the depth of the work. We were very pleased. And I have to say, fame and fortune, or fame and stardom, suddenly gets thrust upon you to open your bedroom curtains one morning and find there is a BBC van and another TV company van parks outside your house, and the phone is ringing its head off. We had one day where we were besieged with information and people wanted to talk to us in an interview about what we'd done. But the key thing we did do, which was very positive, was we partnered with the Railway Benefit Fund, which obviously was one of the funds that also would have supported Jack Mills and David Whitby, and we raised £2,700 for charity. And that was one of our features, that if anyone was unhappy with us, we simply suggested that they might later make a donation, which might help ease their conscience a little bit. And to get £2,700, I think, was quite good. That was within 50 shows, and we had a counter on the previous slide. There was a on the part of the electronic box, every time the sequence was initiated, it would clock up the amount of activities, and we worked out that if we averaged it for so many people in the little room at the time and the amount of times we ran it, we kept a log, and we reckon that it was seen by over 30,000 people, which is quite an accomplishment in 2.5 years. And we managed to get to Glasgow. We actually went to the platform where the train left from while we were exhibiting up there at the Glasgow show, and we even made it to Aberdeen, where they had a feature for the train, the Great Train Robbery exhibit, which was hosted through the Postal Museum, British Postal Museum. So it was a very controversial diorama, but I think we've shown. Next slide, please, Jackie. This just shows that it was one of our ambitious projects. There were virtually no compromises because size and everything, we could get it all in. But we do accept that it was perhaps an awkward subject, but we believe people accepted it in the manner we wished to portray. And it was a good theatrical presentation, and it taught us a lot about how to do things to do with lighting and other considerations that we've implemented in later layouts, and we still continue to do so. So next slide, Jackie. So here's our recap. Really, Central Works was the space and the operating potential had a compromise in terms of what we could show. Harpington East, well, Andy's size of house, storage, garage, cost, of course, is not cheap. 60 feet of layout is impressive in any size, particularly in O gauge, so do get a chance to see that. And of course, the West Coast Mainline diorama, the GTR, as we call it, Great Train Robbery. It's now been passed over to the Nene Valley Railway, who have a very large postal exhibit at their Ferry Meadows station. They've got rolling stock. They've got the one remaining coach from the train, not the one that was obviously robbed, because that was not part of it, but they've got the one remaining coach that belongs to the NRM, but it's been restored and left at the railway. And they have a large exhibition of road vehicles and other ephemera, and our layout is part of it. It's not shown in the same way that we showed it. It's not in the darkened enclosure. They've set it into an enclosure which allows you to have a series of buttons, and you can look at a picture, you can press the button and it lights up a small area, rather like those old town maps you used to see in large towns where you could go and press a button and it would show you where the library was, or it'd tell you where the bus station was, same sort of thing. So that's really our West Coast Mainline diorama, but it is what it is. So next slide, please, Jackie. And that really is it. I think but apologise, we've been a few minutes over. My fault for talking too much. Thank you for your patience and your time. If there are any questions, please come and ask now, or as you've done through the session. And also, we will look forward to seeing you at some of the shows. Same ugly faces, I'm afraid, but that's what you get.
I'm afraid so.
So thank you from the Loggies, that's us. We're still developing projects. We've got about 12 O-gauge layouts that we exhibit and show in various shapes, sizes, from 9 foot to 60 foot. Depends how brave the exhibition managers are. And there's always something to see and talk about. And as I say, you'll see us at Stafford. Yeah. So, thank you very much and good night.
Thank you.
Ian, have you got any questions that need to come up which haven't been picked up as we've gone through?
No, I think Nigel was really on the ball and was getting to them in his spiel before I had a chance to pose them to him. So well done for that, Nigel.
Well, it worked. I mean, luckily, with
Yes.
the chat part of it, we could see that there were questions coming up, and they just, while Andy was talking, I've got another PC at the side, and I was able to just pick up something. So yes, it worked better. In fact, we were more worried about having not enough material to fill the time, and of course, as usual, we've gone way over it. So sorry if we kept you all up from your Horlicks, boys, but here we are.
Well, it's been an excellent evening, and there's lots of people just posting that and saying thank you for a pleasant, informative evening. Stephen Weston saying excellent evening, thank you. Pete Matcham had to go slightly earlier, but said what an excellent evening it was and how engaging it's been. And I think when you're telling a story about layouts that you've built, and the passion has really come across, and I think when you're doing something
Especially
about
Andy's,
a real location,
Yeah.
there has to be a passion. You've got to make the time for the research. You've got to delve into all of the background and the archives.
Well, there's a year, I mean, just for the Great Train Robbery, there was a year's research before we even did anything, and then we built it, and then obviously we exhibited. So yeah, there's very key, and obviously Andy's got a lifetime of being from Harpenden and the Hertfordshire area. He was able to pick that up. Central Works was slightly more compressed, but of course there was a lot more compromises. So really, it does come down to the cost, the time, and the space, because they're the things that most of us either don't have enough of, or unless you're very lucky. But that's what you get. You there's a compromise in everything. But out of our three, I would say Harpenden is really very much a labour of love, and it's still not quite big enough, but it's all there. Sure. And the Great Train Robbery Diorama was the one that was probably the most accurate. We went to great lengths to get the detail right. Central Works is, it's a bit of a compromise, partly because it reflects two locations if we want to run it for two. But we'd encourage anyone who comes to the shows, if you see us, do come along and talk to us. We'll gladly tell you and show you things, and we're delighted. So that's one of the things we enjoy about the exhibitions. We're quite prolific at exhibitions, and we like to be able to talk to people and show them. We're not faceless, and we're not stuck behind the layout and won't talk to people. We encourage questions. We want to talk to them, and usually we've got somebody that would be free and spend some time with you. So yeah, enjoy. Thank you very much for inviting us.
Thank you.
I shall just quickly talk to you about the next one. So if
sorry, Jackie, just before you do, just a couple of messages from people. Andy Sparks, thanks for the evening. I look forward to seeing both at the shows in September, i.e. Nigel and Andy. Stuart Heesman, thank you very much for a very interesting evening. My father and I are planning on modelling with you in East Sussex during LBSC days, so this was very informative. And another Ian says, interesting and an informative evening. Learned some new things too, so thank you for your time.
Thank you.
That makes it worthwhile, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you for that. Lovely. Cheers, guys.
Well,
back to you, Jackie.
Thank you very much to Nigel Adams and Andy Ward of the Luton Gauge Group. And as I know that in the audience with us tonight, we've had Dave Cosby, who was mentioned, and Chris Fry, who was mentioned. I didn't notice if anybody else had arrived from the Luton group, but
Andrew Jones was there as well, and also Kevin. Couple of people,
Kevin. Debbie.
So thank you very much to everybody.
Thanks for the tech support as well, because us Luddites here, we had to crank up the stove to get the presentation to work the other night when we did a rehearsal. So that was appreciated, because it was a bit tricky.
It was a bit fraught, Thank you, Ian, for all your help.
No, my pleasure to help, guys. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, definitely.
Great.
Okay, so we've mentioned the next.
Oh my God, who's that man?
And it happens to be Ian Allen. So
great, we can heckle. Fantastic.
Yes.
Great.
Payback.
So Ian's going to do Templot Part 2. We had a very interesting session back in April, and Ian's going to be taking us a step further about using Templots so that you can actually do very realistic track planning. And I'm sure that you'll find that most enjoyable. The joining instructions give you a link to the first session. So if you missed the one in April, you can catch up by watching the video, and you can start booking for the September session at midnight tonight, and then a reminder will be sent out nearer the time. So do join us again on the 26th of September. We're really looking forward to seeing as many people as possible next week. We're at our new venue, Stafford County Showground. I can tell you that everything's going according to plan so far, touch wood. I think I'm living and breathing Gildex at the moment. Advanced tickets are on sale. In the letter I sent out to all members, it did have a link to that. And of course, as we've mentioned, Central Works is one of our layouts that you can come and see. And everything you've learned tonight, you'll be able to witness in motion. There's Gildex modelling sessions as well. Do go on to our website and click on Gildex under events in the drop down menu. So at the very top you've got events, and then click on that drop down menu says Gildex, and it will take you to a very good menu of all the different aspects. So you can go to what you want rather than scrolling. And if you click on the workshops, you can actually book for any of these sessions. So it's new for Gildex this year that you can actually meet people who've been doing some of our evening wigs. Robert Brown doing false perspective, Rob Bishop doing basic soldering. Just make sure you bring your soldering iron to that one, and a bit of scrap brass or metal. And David Wright will be doing about creating buildings from DAS, and they're all upstairs in the balcony area. So nice to have some workshops, and of course the usual annual general meeting. In terms of Harpenden East, that's going to be featured, as you heard, at Severn Valley Railway O-Gauge event, and that's towards the end of September on the 24th and the 25th. So it's held in the engine house at Highley, and the tickets do include some rail travel as well. So you can get those tickets from the Severn Valley Railway website, and it's always a really nice, friendly event. So if you're interested in O-Gauge and you like the preserved railway as well, it's a very good exhibition to go to. And then the West Coast Mainline Diorama is now at Neen Valley Railway near Peterborough. And again, it's very, very worth seeing. If you didn't see it when it was on the exhibition circuit, it's well worth going to see. It's beautifully modelled. So if anybody is a non-member and wants to join us, I know there's been people attending as non-members to several of these evenings. Do think about taking a free trial, finding out what the Guild has to offer you. You get access for a whole month to everything that's on the website, all the members areas, and then you can choose to convert if you wish. And you can easily become a member online by literally clicking on About Us, which is in the top menu bar there. And then this drop down menu says Join Online, and you get the actual chance to just click on free membership. So we are not that far over, actually. We're not doing too badly. So I'll leave you for now and say thank you very much again to everybody, and look forward to seeing you next week at Gildex for those who can make it. And then we'll all be back here again for the next evening with on September the 26th, which is a Monday night. So any final questions popped up from anybody?
No, there's no more questions. Just some more thanks from Terry, Dale and Neil.
Yeah.
Excellent evening. Thank you all. Many thanks, and thanks for a good evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you too, gents.
And Stephen Weston actually joined us from offshore. So that says something about technology, doesn't it?
Excellent.
He's 4 hours off Zeebrugge at the moment, because he works offshore at the moment. So apart from
must be a slow night. He must be desperate.
No, apart from people joining us from all over Europe and further afield, we've now got somebody actually joining us from offshore. So that's quite a first for us.
Sure.
Brilliant. Thank you to everybody. I'm going to end the evening now and disconnect the Zoom. And I just want to say thank you to Ian for helping this evening.
Pleasure.
And thank you again, Nigel and Andy. Really, really excellent evening. Thank you very much.
Stephen says he's on a wind farm.
See you soon.
Yeah, he's involved with installing the wind farm turbines.
Great.
Yeah. Excellent. Right. Thank you very much.
Good night, all.
See you soon.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you next week.